There we go. So I want to get first thank North Carolina DEQ, State Lead Trust Fund, in particular Sharon Gold. She's the project manager for this site. And Atlas AT Associates of North Carolina, Al Quarles. I know he's been involved with this site for a long period of time as well. Three of us worked together on refining the conceptual site model and putting together the plan, and without their knowledge and help, this project would not have been the success that it is. So, quick background, it's your typical mom and pop gas station in a setting out on a 2-lane country road. It was in service from the 50s through 81 when the tanks were abandoned in place with sand. That's a new one on me. Early 2000s, while they were drilling some new water wells across the street, had some petroleum odors that kicked off the investigation. There's no water, public water for the area, so all the residents nearby are on domestic use wells. See, this is the former Holmes Grocery footprint. You can see the small tank pits, pipe and trench, former dispenser. So early 2000s, small excavation of the USTs and the dispenser. Once the building was raised, an additional soil excavation in 2010 and 2018 to try to remove all of the mass. So mass removal in this area associated with the tanks, additional source area removal below the building. Multiple rounds of assessments, no NAVL. Again, you see this site map that we have is focused strictly on the overburden. These wells are all screened relatively shallow. Again, this is part of a much larger problem that extends further to the southeast and across the street as well. Old picture kind of showing the state of the building and that pump island that was excavated. So the title is Quantitative High Resolution Site Characterization. And really that is just a play off of what we know now as qHRSC, whereas injection contractors, we need to know the speciated data, really, and being able to grab that really high profile soil and groundwater data every 1 to 2 feet, and being able to determine the exact concentrations of benzene, naphthalene, trimethylbenzene, to be able to put together a remediation plan. In addition, we want to really get a handle on the soil type. We want to get a better handle, a better characterization of the saturated zone, and take some discrete groundwater samples to supplement the existing monitor well network. And then we also want to provide a 3D model of the data that we collect. This is really helpful for collaborating with your clients, stakeholders, being able to show them in 3D, being able to show them where they're having their problems, where the mass is, and why we are proposing to do the remediation that we're planning. So I mentioned a couple times, this is more of a process. What is our process to get to the endpoint of remediation? We want to review the historical data, identify data gaps, come up with an RDC plan. That's the RDC is the actual field work of going out collecting these high density soil sampling. You'll see here, we also want to incorporate qHRSC tooling. For larger sites, we work with UVOST, MIP. Not a bad idea to use those to really narrow your soil sampling. Once we get that data back, we can review it, put together a 3D quantitative conceptual site model, and from that data, revise our injection design or remedial design. So jumping back into the historical data review, we want to work with our clients, work with you to get a handle on the historical data, figure out what our problem is, what we need to do, and identify those gaps where we can implement the RDC. So this slide is, we'll go back to this. Mentioned this is a small portion of the site, the overburden, as you can see, MW4 directly down gradient from the former source area, we're looking at historical concentrations, double-digit ppm for benzene. Pretty consistent. We have a few others over the GCLs, if you're familiar with North Carolina, which is 5,000 ppb of benzene, but then undefined as we move further south towards the domestic use well. Reviewing the data with our client, this is the initial conceptual site model for the site. You can see MW4 screened in the overburden. And it looks like we have 50 to 70 feet of overburden on top of bedrock. Backing up one more time, you can see VE wells. These are vertical extent wells into the bedrock. Shows no contamination. So when we were contacted about this site, it was really two things we wanted to identify here. We wanted to get a better handle on the vertical and horizontal extent of the contamination and treat this source area that we knew was existed between the building where they did the excavation and MW4 where we have 14 ppm of benzene. So color-coded, this was broken up into 2 RDC events. The blue was our overburden direct push. We gathered some data, refined the conceptual site model, worked with the state and Atlas, and mobilized out a year later for a second RDC round to install some more wells and collect some more data. I'll mention that the soil and groundwater data collected during the RDC was sent to the RPI, Project Support Laboratory in Denver. This is critical to being able to offer this qHRSC and RDC, is that the RPI lab will run this data pro bono with no strings attached as far as expectations for using the product. So this slide I think I took from the ITRC document. Oftentimes it is a struggle to go through this preliminary investigation. We spend all this money, put it in borings, put it in wells. Do we need more? Yes, we can jump right in and start doing injections, start doing excavations, any other kind of remedial activities. But if you don't have a really strong handle on your conceptual site model, you can see how that once you get into the remediation phase, those costs increase. So by really sitting down and looking at that conceptual site model, identifying the data gaps, being realistic of what we need to accomplish, we can save money on that. Again, the RDC slide with the RDC and qHRSC locations. See, we did 13 borings, direct push, did some shallow refusal, brought out a sonic rig to be able to get a little deeper and install some monitoring wells. If you remember back on the first slide with the initial conceptual site model, we had this idea that we were dealing with overburden sitting on top of competent bedrock. Well, coming out here and doing this qHRSC, being able to actually look at the logs, be able to pull up soil samples, we could see that there is actually this overburdened saprolite layer, which we were able to advance with the direct push rig down to about 40 feet. But then if you're familiar with the Piedmont, we hit a PWR, partially weathered rock layer, between, we'll say roughly 40 feet. And we were able to get through that with the sonic rig down to about 60 feet. It was pretty consistent where we got to depth. And below that, we did not do any further investigation, but bedrock seemed to be around 60 feet. I'll show you some pictures of the soil, but we did identify the soil type. We identified some residual structure, and really it brought the picture of the conceptual site model into a higher resolution, being able to explain how this plume is moving through that overburden. Onto the 3D visualization. Now this, as I mentioned, it's nice to offer this to be able to take that data off the spreadsheet, put it into 3D and be able to share it with the client, be able to sit down with the stakeholders and go through that data and show exactly where you have those issues. We evaluated a handful of software. I won't go into all of them, but Everyone knows about CTEC and EVS. You can see down here on the bottom right, Jim Deppa helped us out tremendously on this project, installing our RDC data into EVS and creating some very nice images. We've also worked with our colleagues Elskov over in Denmark. They are part of the RPI group. I think they've been injecting the RPI products for close to 10 years now. They've actually developed an in-house software that does a really nice job of visualizing your 3D data, and it's also compatible with the direct image qHRSC tooling. You can log that directly from that software, and for us, you'll see another slide where we can actually log our injections with the software and be able to show the actual injections in 2D and 3D with the client real time. You see the slide on the left is these both images are from this site in North Carolina. You can see the number of samples that we're collecting. So over here on the outer edges, a lot of 0.5s, but as you get into the core of the plume, we get some higher concentrations. Another slide showing the RDC data. I think this is, you see in soil, it's around 100 ppb in soil, and you can see this plume. Being able to turn this in 3D and move it around, you can actually zoom in and be able to see those soil impacts and how they associate with your screen interval. But you can also, this is a good one to see where we've updated the soil as well. It goes back to that old cross section of the PWR layer that's going to need more investigation. Showing 3D in a report's pretty difficult to do. So these are 3D images projected onto a 2D map. So these are all the high concentrations from each RDC point projected on this map. It's hard to see on this map, but hopefully you can see my cursor down here, RDC1, RDC9, that blue dot is actually MW4. Building footprint was up here north of RDC4. So as you can see, the RDC, this is benzene and soil, soil mass removed in the source area. However, we got some pretty significant soil concentrations just down gradient of the source area. However, it is, fortunately for us, just upgrading of MW4 with the higher groundwater concentration. So you can see this area, we're looking upwards to 15,000 ppb of benzene in the soil. This is another map. This is TVPH, which is also critical information to have when doing any sort of injection design or remedial design to know your terminal electron acceptor donor. And this, again, kind of mimics the benzene in soil where we have this tremendous soil mass acting as a source, upgrading of our MW4 with the higher concentrations. Now, we still have pretty significant soil concentrations immediately around MW4 that we need to account for, but really knowing that we need to account for that mass up gradient. So this is actual soil pulled from the RDC. As you can see, you said it was a saprolite. For those of you who don't know, saprolite is a chemically weathered rock. For those in Kentucky and Tennessee, where I originally came from, had a lot of history there. Your reddish brown silty clay is a saprolite of limestone. It's actually weathered limestone. Here in the Piedmont, we're dealing with metamorphic rocks, dealing with granites, we're dealing with gneiss, we're dealing with schist. So these rocks are actually chemically weathered in place, but that chemical weathering preserves this structure. So you can see this subvertical fracture that we found. It's really neat to be able to see that. You can see the foliation in this, the remnant structure is still there, still present. And this is critical information to have. If I go back to the old boring logs, these soils were classified properly using USCS, which is what we use as well, as a silty sand. And when you break it apart, that is how I would describe it as well. But knowing that we're coming in here for an injection, knowing and being able to observe and identify this remnant structure really aids us in not only our injection volumes, but our flow rates and our grid spacing. Real quick, I think I'm running a little bit late, but qHRSC data integration, UVOS, MIP, we're not saying it's terrible. We use it in conjunction with our qHRSC all the time. Jump down here to the ITRC. If you don't really know your concentrations or what you're dealing with, it's really hard to make that correlation of MIP response to actual TCE or PCE concentration. So that's where you're limited with using the typical HRSC tooling. Using it in conjunction with quantitative data is really what we're pushing here. Again, another 3D model, some cross sections showing benzene plume, and then the BOS200 pilot injection. You can see the ovals represent actual injection shots as we move down the saturated zone. Obviously, most of you all know that we inject the RPI trap and treat products. For this site, we use BOS200 plus. It is actually taking BOS200 that everybody knows, activated carbon, slow release terminal electron acceptors, and a blend of bacteria. The BOS200 plus, which I think Ed Winter with RPI is giving a webinar next week on the science behind that product, but it's basically a food grade starch with yeast extract and another bacteria and another form of sulfate to really speed up the process of degradation. Again, this is some evidence of the treatment. It's really hard to say, hey, how much have we treated? You absorbed all this on the activated carbon. Well, it's hard to measure that directly, so we use other methods, specifically looking at the terminal electron acceptor depletion and dissolved gas generation, which we run that in-house at the RPI lab as well. Injecting these products, they're solid. We inject them as slurries. Having the right equipment and the right people in the field to put those in the ground is critical. I think most people, this is a pretty old slide kind of showing the ideal situation. Injection points offset vertically as well. It's 18 to 24 inch vertical injection intervals. That's going to be determined based on your lithology. So being able to go out there, seeing that soil, that's going to help us determine how tight we need to space these injection intervals. And I always stress this, top down, we've found over the years is really the only way to inject anything, but especially slurries. I took this previous slide from ITRC presentation as well. Kind of shows you, more, I don't want to say the reality, but you can see there's some in fine grained soils, you can find some preferential pathways and you will see some daylighting. But having the right people in the field to mitigate that, to make those changes and minimize how much is actually coming out of the surface is critical. Here's just another overview of our triangular grid pattern, being able to get coverage around these wells, and also you can see the groundwater flow direction. Knowing that we have mass coming in from our injection area helps us decide how many injection rows we need to install. So here's a map of our pilot test area. So we did 24 injection points. This ISO contour is benzene groundwater. So you can see we have some mass coming up from up gradient, but maybe wrapping around a little bit. So we extend the pilot grid out a little to protect NW13. So it's really twofold. We wanted to see immediate reductions around NW4, and we wanted to see what kind of protection we could have of NW13 during the injections, or post-injection. 5-foot centers for this pilot test to determine our radius of influence that we were going to, in our grid spacing for our full-scale injection. Put in approximately 18,000 pounds of product. So very nice graph, right? See consistent double-digit ppm. Immediately post-injection, we have concentrations down, and this is benzene over time. We'll go to this log scale. Gives you a little better resolution. So we saw immediate reductions down to close to 1 ppb benzene. Based on the mass in our injection area, we predicted that there would be a rebound. Rebounded back up to close to part per million, but then over the course of a year, trending down, and a year later, we're still hovering around 1 ppb for MW4. MW13 I didn't put on here, still looking great. I think we're in the double-digit ppb for MW13 as well, so close to 99% reduction for that well too. I think I'm running up against it, but return on investigation really just hammers home being able to review that conceptual site model, refine it with the qHRSC, and will help with your expectations for your injections. And real quick, I have to give a shout out to the crew in the field. So this is our guys from the Virginia office. We got Colin Murphy and Arthur here. We got Roman Dela Cruz and our site lead Colin Hogg here on the left. I think I'm right up against it, so I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions.
All right, excellent job, Nathan. Thank you. Let's see, we've got a few minutes left. We want to be timely. We definitely value your time being with us today. We do have a question here asking about the application of the qHRSC process on smaller sites. They've said, we often work on small gas station sites. Would you use this approach for a small site?
Absolutely. You know, every site's unique. If you have, and your investigation process also is unique. So you might have been able to spend a little bit more money up front collecting that soil data, getting a really good handle on your groundwater. So you might not need it, but this is really what it's made for. It's for these smaller sites where you don't need to go out and spend the money on a UVOST. You want to go out here, take some targeted samples, refine the conceptual site model. So we do this often on small gas station sites, for sure.
Okay. Another question. Can you say what the cost of this specific project was?
This specific project, the pilot test, I want to say was around $80,000. I can double check that. Running some math, I remember I think we were right around $120 to $160 per cubic yard. But again, that's on a pilot test on a 5-foot grid. I will say for the full scale, one of the full scale injections that we just finished for this project, treating that up gradient source area, we were able to extend that grid pattern out to a 7.5-foot grid and save some money on the full scale.
Okay, and I might chime in too that getting this quantified data, you know, in the past, in a lot of situations, we look at that as it can be cost prohibitive, depending on the number of samples you're getting. But again, the RPI Project Support Laboratory does that lab analysis pro bono, so that can make a huge difference in the cost and make that very valuable to get that quantified data.
Absolutely. Allows us to offer this service. You're right, Ed. Without that, it would be cost prohibitive to use a commercial, for sure.
Right. Okay, another question popping in here. You mentioned not using soil sampling to corroborate your MIP findings. Why not? And how would someone quantify MIP data?
Well, I would use MIP data as a guide, and I would use it on a larger site. Really use that MIP data to define your plume, and then go in on a tighter grid with the qHRSC, grab those soil samples and run those at the lab.
Yeah, and you know, and I would chime in on that as well, saying that, you know, using soil sampling to you know, is an important part of the process doing high-res site characterization. in terms of, you know, getting some ground truthing, but there's never a direct correlation between a sample with that high res tool and an offset boring where we collect a soil sample and run it in the lab. That direct correlation is always going to be problematic. Heterogeneity rules, of course, unless we're taking that exact same sample on a bench, running it with a high resolution tool, and then taking that same aliquot and doing a laboratory analysis, it's just going to be difficult. Too many variables come into play. It's just definitely not the practice that we would recommend. Let's see, we've got just a few seconds left here. Got one more question about pH and groundwater. Is that something that you look at in your qHRSC process and how that might affect your design with these products?
pH is important. We are in, you know, this is a bioremediation process, so we have to know the pH. And I'll say in my experience that hasn't been an issue. I know there are a few projects where we have a low pH where we would need to buffer. We would need to buffer that pre-injection. So yeah, having that data is pretty critical. Pre-injection, pre-design, for sure.
Okay. Very good. Well, we are coming right up on 11:30, and again, we know your time is very valuable. Everybody being with us today, we appreciate that very much. And again, we appreciate your patience for some of those glitches we had yesterday. Might have created an opportunity for a few new folks to come in. So maybe that was the silver lining. We will have a recording posted on the website. Usually takes a few days, maybe check back in a week or so. And feel free to share a link with your colleagues and reach out to us with any questions if they occur to you later. So thanks again, everybody, for being with us today. And we hope you have a great rest of your week.